Hey, what's up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to episode number 40 of the Spun Today podcast. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and this episode is going to be slightly different from, not slightly, pretty much dramatically different, because it has nothing to do with writing, really. It has to do with politics, or specifically elections, which is something that I'm into. I know some people hear politics and elections and just completely tune it out. I get that. I was like that for a long time also, and until it's something that I got into. So if it's something that you think you'd be interested in, I'm just going to break down. It's going to be a short episode. I'm going to break down my understanding of specifically the presidential elections that are going on now. I know you must have heard on the news or read on the internet different things about caucuses and primaries and shit like that, and a lot of people don't know what that is. I didn't know what that was, and it's kind of interesting when you get into like the nuts and bolts of it, to see like how the election process actually works, because you hear things like the Electoral College and primaries and general elections and caucuses and delegates and super delegates and a whole bunch of like different political terms that aren't commonplace, and you kind of just goes over your head, or you take it for granted or whatever. And I just found it more interesting once I got to know like what those things were. In my job, no like expert or anything like that. I definitely recommend that you guys, look into the stuff yourselves, but this is just my understanding as I see it, and it gives a pretty general overview of what the process is actually like. If you're a more visual person, which I usually am for certain things, I put a bunch of videos, like 5 or 6 different videos in the episode notes for you guys to check out. You can check it out on my website at spuntoday.com/podcasts/40, which is the episode number, or just in the episode notes of your iPhone or wherever you're listening to this podcast. All the links are in there. Also, they're all YouTube videos for the most part, and they do a good job of explaining different things that I'm going to cover here in this episode, like caucuses versus primaries, a general overview of the election process in the United States, the Electoral College, and like shit like that. So check that out if you're more of a visual person. It's those like cartoon-ish or animated explainer videos, which I like, which I'm into. And I put in there for you guys to check out as well. All right, so let's start breaking this down. So first off, it doesn't work that everybody goes on election day in November to the polls, and by everybody I mean like the citizens in the U.S. that are still allowed to vote, unless you're a felon or if you're the wrong skin color down south and they try to get you not to vote. But that's a whole nother level to the game. So it does not work that everyone in November gets to go to the polls and vote, and they, tally up all the millions of votes and say the person that got the most is our next president of the United States. It doesn't work that way. That is what that portion of everything is known as the popular vote, which you guys, I'm sure I've heard before the term. And if you haven't, well, that's what it is. That's what it's called. It's the popular vote, the vote of the public or the people. Now, and that's pretty much like the close to the last step in the full election process. Now, also, the election is, like I said, in November, so it's months away. However, the process has already begun. That's why you guys have been seeing it so much in the news lately, with all the candidates on the Republican side which today I believe Carly Fiorina finally threw in the towel. So it's beginning at least to narrow down the field, which normally happens after the first primaries begin. And I'm going to explain what that is in a second. But you have, I'm pretty sure you've been seeing Trump in the news, Donald Trump, and Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio, and Chris Christie, the governor from Jersey. And on the Democratic side, you've seen Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, feel the burn, and also Martin O'Malley. On the Democratic side, it's more of a narrow field. And now, just to explain what is a primary, that term primary, versus a caucus. Primary and caucus pretty much are different versions of the same thing. What a primary and what a caucus is doing is voting out a candidate that will eventually represent the party, either the Democratic or the Republican Party, in the general election. So a primary election and a general election are elections within the party. That's why you see Hillary Clinton debating Bernie Sanders, or all the Republican candidates debating each other, as opposed to a Republican debating a Democrat, because that is what happens in the general election. Whereas in the primary election, it's, all right, let's duke it out amongst ourselves, amongst us team members, if you will, and decide who is the best person for the job and who will represent all of us, whether it be us Republicans or us Democrats, to verse the opposing party in the general election. Now, some states have primaries and some states have caucuses. And they vary in style, but the end goal is that. To figure out which candidate is going to be chosen to represent the party. Now, the way it works, this is where it starts getting a little hairy. Again, it doesn't work with a popular vote directly. So you have a caucus, which the way it works in Iowa is the first state to vote. It's known as the Iowa Caucus, and it happened about 2 weeks ago. And that's why it gets so much attention, not because it's super significant in terms of I don't know, in terms of weight, but it has some significance, and it's like the first taste of how the public is leaning and is going to vote. And once the Iowa caucus happens, and then 2 weeks later the New Hampshire primaries, the parties start and the people start getting a bit more polarized, and depending on how like horribly you do, like let's say like a Carly Fiorina, you decide to drop out and you have no shot after a certain point. And it's not to say that anyone who wins the Iowa caucus or the New Hampshire primary is definitely going to be the eventual candidate, but it kind of just shows where you stack up at that point in time, and then you adjust your strategy and or candidacy accordingly, or throw in the towel. So a primary is more so what you're used to seeing, like when you go to the general election, and it's especially here in New York, it's a closed private ballot. You walk into a few election cycles, it was a booth where you walk in, close a curtain, check off on that big metal machine the candidate that you're voting for, and then you turn the big lever from like left to right or right to left, I forget which it is, to cast your actual vote. And then it gets like tallied up within the machine, and the vote tallies. Literally has like a counter in it for that you can't see. You see it like when you open up the machine, which I've seen before. And it has like let's say President Obama, and then a counter, and this particular machine counted 38 votes for President Obama, or whichever candidate it is. And as of more recently, and it may not be yet across the board for every single voting precinct, but we have now kind of like scantrons that you privately go in like this little cube looking stand, like podium looking thing, fill out your little scantron, select all your candidates, then walk over to computer and scan it into the computer, and the computer tallies up your vote that way. So we're getting a little more technologically inclined, and that's the way it works here in New York now. So that is more so what a primary looks like, what a primary election looks like across the board. Then a caucus is more and something important to know is the fact that, like, for a primary, just like in the general election, you have, it's open voting all day. So people, go before work or they go after work, and you tend to get a higher voter turnout because you open it up for such a long period of time that people become more inclusive in that process. Whereas for caucuses, for example, let's use the Iowa caucus, for example, and things vary state to state because everything is ran by each individual state, right? But generally speaking, and using the Iowa caucus as an example, people gather in places like gymnasiums of schools and churches and building. Well, actually, I don't think churches. That probably doesn't happen, the whole separation of church and state thing. But town halls and centers and stuff like that, where groups of people can gather, and you literally have groups of people trying to sway each other, and that's what the process of caucusing is. And you have pockets of people throughout the gymnasium, for example, and we're for Hillary, we're for Bernie, and people speak, and politicians visit, and people pretty much try to sway each other, and they vote that way. There's 20 people here, so us 20 are voting for Bernie Sanders, us 19 are voting for Hillary or whatever. And that's how the caucusing aspect works. And it's not like an all-day thing. It has a shorter window, and as you see, it's more for like go hard type people that are really into the process and about it, which is cool. But at the same time, some people don't care that much, and that's why you have less of a voter turnout in those situations. Last difference that I want to point out between caucus and a primary is the fact that different states also have different rules in terms of allowing which voters to allow to vote. For example, you have closed I believe that's the right term, closed party elections in primaries here in New York. So, for example, I'm a registered Democrat, so I can only vote in the Democratic primary. Some states don't have it that way. Some states have it that if you're a registered voter, period, you can vote in any of the primaries. So there is I don't know which states, but there is a situation where me as a registered Democratic voter in a certain state can vote in the Republican primary, for example. Now there's a big criticism of that is the fact that, let's say in a state or an area that has a large Democratic base, let's say, for example, here in New York, if that were possible, if we were able to vote for within the Republican primary, we could kind of sabotage their election, and a shitload of us Democrats can just go vote for the worst guy that they have to make sure that person is the nominee and going up against the best guy that we have, type of thing. You know what I mean? Like, so fuckery could happen there, I guess, is the reason for having it closed versus open. And I'm sure there's reasons for having it open just to be, I guess, more openly Democratic. But yeah, I don't know the reasoning behind having it open, and I don't see why they would want that. But moving on, So that's pretty much the differences, main differences that I see with caucus versus a primary. Now, this is where it starts getting hairy. You're not voting. When you are voting in the primary, you're literally filling out the piece of paper, the scantron or whatever for, let's say, either Hillary or Bernie Sanders. However, you're technically not voting for them directly. You're voting for delegates. Now, delegates are people that are assigned to eventually vote for that particular candidate that you chose on your scantron at the national convention for the party. So there's a Democratic National Convention and a Republican National Convention. When we vote in a primary election or in a caucus, we are voting for a delegate, and the delegate eventually goes to the Democratic and or Republican National Convention, whichever one won, and is representatively casting your vote for that particular candidate. Now, there are... this is where the numbers get a little bit weird in terms of delegates. Currently, there are expected to be at the National Convention for the Republican National Convention, which is going to be in July, as well as the Democratic National Convention. And I'm not sure how they get these. This I was trying to find out, and I couldn't find it. How they get the actual number of delegates that are assigned to each party. But there are 2,472 approximately, and they're only approximate numbers that I could find that are expected to be delegates for the Republican National Convention for the Republican Party. And on the Democratic side, there are 4,764 delegates that will be attending the Democratic National Convention, approximately again. So those 2,472 people, which are allotted based on your primary votes and your caucusing votes, are going to go vote for the candidates that you voted for, essentially, right? So if... let me see here. I'm just reading through a couple notes that I have. So, all right, boom, perfect. In the Iowa caucus that just happened, Bernie Sanders caught up, pretty much tied with Hillary. I think 36 delegates apiece or something like that. It was like 0.3% difference or some shit. Something very, very, like a very hairline difference between the two. And Bernie wasn't expected to do so well, so it's pretty cool to see. And then he just pummeled Hillary by a landslide in the New Hampshire primary, but that was expected because he's a senator from Vermont, which is the neighboring state, and he has that whole New England area on lock. So the what was I going to say? The delegates from the Iowa caucus are whatever. Let's say it's 36 and 36. So Hillary now has 36 delegates, and I don't have the exact number, but let's just say for the sake of arguments 36. I think it's like 36 or 32. And Bernie has 36 and 32. Well, now he has a few more because of New Hampshire, but sticking just to the Iowa numbers. So let's say they have 36 apiece. So from the 4,764 delegates that will be approximately at the Democratic National Convention, 36 of those, which are the ones that Hillary won in Iowa, will be casting a vote for Hillary, and 36 will be casting a vote for Bernie, and so forth. The rest of the 4,764 delegates will be the ones that are added up as we go through the rest of this primary and election cycle up until July, when we have the actual national conventions, which again is when those delegates will vote for the politicians that they are allotted to based on your votes when you voted in the primaries and in the caucuses. And like I said, there's the Iowa caucus, New Hampshire caucus. There's something called Super Tuesday in March, which you guys may have heard of. That is when 10 states have primaries on the same day. And then between now and July, all 50 states plus Washington, D.C., so 51 primaries will happen, and 2 of them already happened, being Iowa Caucus and the New Hampshire primaries. And again, 10 more in March for Super Tuesday, and sprinkled throughout, the rest will be the rest of the states. So you guys with me so far? This is going to be 51. Just a quick little recap again. 51 primaries between now and July. In those primaries, you're going to vote either in a primary or a caucus, depending on how your state has that process set up. And you are technically voting for delegates. Delegates which are members of the party that are allotted to the candidate that you chose to vote for. Now, the candidate that comes out from the national convention is going to be the nominee for the general election. But that candidate has to win by more than half of all the delegate votes. So it can't be like a tie after the national convention, or it can't be like, one candidate has 30%, another one has like 28, or another one has 28, or whatever, right? They have to win by more than 50% of the number of delegates. If not, then negotiations within the party begin to take place. Something else that's very important to note is a term called super delegates. Now, this is where I don't know how with this I am. I don't know, but at face value, I don't like the idea, because at least like with the delegates, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more when I speak about the next phase of this whole thing during the general election with the Electoral College and shit like that. The delegates serve as kind of a balance to the people and vice versa. So you can't have just pockets of popular areas where people vote more, kind of running like a tyranny on the system, and everyone else has to go by them, because you have the delegates in place to balance that out a bit. But then you have something called a super delegate, which 20% of all the delegates, so 20% of the figures I gave you before, of the 2,472 Republican delegates and the 4,700 and change Democratic delegates, 20% of them are called super delegates. Super delegates do not have to vote for the people that you allotted them to with your vote. So, like I said, you vote for a delegate, and the delegate is supposed to carry your vote to the national convention and vote as you told them to, right? So 10 delegates were assigned to Hillary Clinton, so those 10 delegates have to go vote for Hillary Clinton based on how the process works. However, with the caveat or the exception that 20% of those 10, so 2 of those people, could do whatever the fuck they want. They could go vote for someone else. And the supposed purpose for this, and these are like higher ups within the party, they are old elected officials, like for example, President Jimmy Carter, Vice President Al Gore, President Bill Clinton, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, State Majority Leader Harry Reid. All these people are super delegates within are super delegates. So they're people that could have been mayors in the past, they could have been governors in the past, and all types of shit, right? So they're people that are very much so entrenched in the party. And the purpose is that they want to have that ability so that just in case somebody that's very popular, but that they don't feel for whatever reason is a strong candidate and strong enough to win in the general election, they want to be able to change their vote to whoever they feel will have a stronger chance in the general election versus the opponent. I don't know. I guess there's an argument for that, but I don't know. It feels at face value, it feels kind of shady. It feels kind of open for scrutiny there and fuckery, and I don't like that. But whatever, it is what it is. And let's see, that's pretty much it. So, so now you go through the process of primaries and caucuses, and again, this all began a couple weeks ago. So from January all the way through November, there's shit happening within the election of a president here in the United States during presidential election year. It's not just that one day in November and that's it. It's shit's happening all along, and like literally beginning, way before January when they start, advertising and running, basically, and running ads and throwing their hat in the ring and testing the waters and shit like that, way before even the Iowa caucus, and having debates and whatever. But the actual inclusion, or not inclusion, the actual, I guess, interaction with the people begins in January and ends with the general election. So now, between now and July, you get all the primaries and caucuses out of the way, and let's say there's a clear winner, which there usually is, after the Democratic and Republican national conventions, which again are going to be this year in July, like the 20s. They're like a week apart, one from the other, and it's like July 20 something and like July in the teens or something like that for the other one. And there's usually a clear winner. Let's say that happens this time around, and you have your two clear candidates that are going to be running in the general election. That is the moment that okay, now Bernie Sanders is going to be facing Donald Trump for the presidency of the United States. It's a scary fucking thought, but that's what it's gearing up towards as of now. But obviously all that shit could still change. Now you get to, okay, the president of the United States is going to be one of these two people. This is the Republican, this is the Democrat. Now they continue campaigning all throughout the general election, which is in November. And in November, everyone in the public votes, or every citizen that feels like it votes. And again, you're not voting directly for either Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. You are voting for an electorate, you're voting for electors, also known as the Electoral College. Now, the number of electors, this is more precise, I guess you can say. It's not like an estimate or expected number, like the scenario you have above with the delegates. This is set up, I think, much better, and is in actually the Constitution. The forefathers and drafters of the Constitution wrote this in to have an electoral college, and the number was, I guess, quote unquote, finalized as of 1964. We have 538 members of the Electoral College. Now, the number 538 comes from the number of members of the House of Representatives. Not that the members of the House of Representatives are the Electoral College, but they mirrored the amount of representatives in Congress, which is 435, and the number of senators, which is 100. So that's 535, plus 3 more for Washington, D.C. So there's 538. Now, this one I like because it definitely balances there's arguments for the Electoral College and against the Electoral College. The argument for the Electoral College is the fact that it gives even the little states a voice. So, I don't know, states like Vermont or New Hampshire, that have a small population, still have a vote because they can't be completely ignored, because they have electoral votes that a president needs to get elected, or most likely would need. And whereas I fucked that up, actually. I think I got a little ahead of myself. The explanation is not going to make sense yet. So let me just backtrack a little bit. So you have 538 members of the Electoral College. So you vote, and you are, putting in a vote for a specific candidate. And the way it works is that the Electoral College is split amongst the 50 states, and like you saw, Washington, D.C. as well, that has 3. And it's based on population, mainly. And the more popular your state, or populated your state, the more electoral votes you have. Now, the way it works in the general election is that it's a winner-take-all in terms of the number of electoral votes that you rack up as a presidential candidate. So Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are winning different states. And let's say if they win, Bernie Sanders gets 10 electoral votes versus a total of 8 for Trump. Bernie Sanders gets all 18. Whoever wins by the larger margin gets all of the electoral votes for that particular state. Now, this is very important because you need to win the presidency with more than half of all the electoral votes, which means there's 538 members of the Electoral College. So you need to have 270 plus votes in order to become the president of the United States. And now, there's a direct correlation, just like with the delegates in the primary and your votes in the caucuses and primaries. There's a direct correlation between your votes in the general election and the members of the Electoral College. So you're voting for a specific candidate, which means that you are technically voting for a member of the Electoral College that will ultimately cast a vote for the candidate that of your choosing based on how many people in the population of your state voted for that particular candidate. So let's say 60% of the people in New York vote for Bernie Sanders, and 40% of the people in New York vote for Donald Trump. If we had 10 electoral votes, which we don't, we have more, but if we had 10 electoral votes, technically 6 of them would go to Bernie, 4 of them would go to Trump, and that being the case, since Bernie has more than Trump, all 10 would go to Bernie. So Bernie would have 10 electoral votes, and now he would only need 260 to win the presidency of the United States. So the first one is pretty much like a race to 270. And it's never that close except in 2000, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But yeah, that's pretty much the goal there. So the Electoral College votes in the president of the United States based on the votes that you cast during the general election. And again, the magic number is 270. Now, this is the pros and cons that I mentioned before. Some people are against the Electoral College because they feel that a state with a large population will get most of the attention, and then the rest of the country has to pretty much deal with whatever the choosing is of those states. Because a state, for example, like California, currently has 55 electoral votes. New York has like 29. Florida has like 27. Ohio has like 20-something. But there are states that have, again, it's based on population. So there's states like Wyoming and North and South Dakota and Alaska, for example. Alaska has 1 electoral vote. It's like a huge state, but very low in population, and has 1 electoral vote. So candidates might not pay attention too much to states like that. So that's the vote against the Electoral College. But I feel that I'm more so for the other, more for it than against it, just because of the fact that if it was just a popular vote, it would work out the same way in terms of number of people, and just the more people you get to vote for more populated areas, you're going to get that type of result. Whereas and then there'll definitely be a tyranny in terms of population, because then the little guy will have zero say. Whereas with the Electoral College, candidates can't completely ignore the small states. And I'll give you a prime example. The situation in 2000 when George W. Bush was running against Al Gore, and Al Gore actually won the popular vote. And this is where it seems a little counterintuitive, but he won the popular vote, but not enough electoral votes, because George W. Bush focused on all those little states and stole just enough of the electoral votes to get 270. I think he wound up with like 271 electoral votes, and that's how he became the president of the United States. However, Al Gore won in the other states with less electoral votes, but by a higher margin of popular vote, and he wound up with like 51% of the popular vote. So it was a hairline thin race there, and super rare that something like that would happen. I don't know if it's happened ever before then, but that just goes to show that, and George Bush won places like Alaska and the North and South Dakota and like stuff like that, places like that. So those little states, literally, he won by like a handful of electoral votes, and those states put him over. And it's not necessarily just Florida, which you can get into the whole conspiracy of Jeb Bush, his brother being the governor of Florida, and that being the state that had to turn in its last. It was like the last state to turn in its votes, and it had to wind up going to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to count the votes. And there was like delays and fuckery and shit like that going on there. And coincidentally, his brother was the governor of the state, and those 20-something votes ultimately counted very much for him, and he became the president of the United States, and the rest is history. But there are, for example, states, smaller swing states. One in particular, I forget which one it is. I think it was West Virginia, that I think was like 2 fucking electoral votes. That's normally a swing state. Al Gore ignored it. Bush campaigned there heavily and won. So those 2 electoral votes made a huge difference. You know what I mean? So this is the shit that I find interesting when it gets to like the nuts and bolts of it. And like there's these battleground states, which we know as again, swing states is another term that you probably heard, where things become like super strategic. And you have states like California and New York that normally vote along Democratic lines. And I guess this is where the whole mentality of, oh, my vote doesn't count anyway, because let's say I'm a Republican in New York, and I vote Republican, the state is going to vote Democrat anyway, so what's the point? I might as well not vote. But I'm kind of against that. I'm against that. I think that it's just like on paper, and I guess like in theory, it's your vote doesn't count. But at the same time, like on a deeper, more like philosophical level, it does. And you are setting a dangerous precedent, and enough people thinking that way, then literally there is no system and the whole shit collapses. And I know it's kind of like a doom and gloom extreme scenario, but I don't know. I'm just a believer in do what's right, even when, how do I say it? What you do when nobody's looking, when it quote unquote might not matter, is when it matters, in my opinion. But whatever. So yeah, I think the drafters of the Declaration of Independence were a few smart dudes and got it right in terms of that, just having an electoral college and realizing that it can't just be a popular vote. Now, so just to draw the comparison again to primaries and caucuses with delegates, and the fact that delegates go vote during the national conventions, the same kind of thing happens in the general election. We vote in November, but the actual Electoral College does not go cast in the votes, which I didn't know this before I started looking into it. They actually go cast their votes sometime in December. Then after that, Congress officially counts these votes sometime in January, early January, and then that is when everything becomes official, which is more like formality, I guess, at that point, because you pretty much know the election results election night in November. And the way the process is set up to work is that, you vote the electors, and the electors are pretty much carrying out your bidding, so we know who they're going to vote for. And but whatever, just the rest of the formality is that the Electoral College officially votes in December. Then in early January, the Congress officially counts these 538 votes and appoints the President of the United States, which is then sworn in mid-January of that following year. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That is how the process works from my understanding of it. So just a very quick recap on the entire thing, which is you have primaries and caucuses to select delegates. Delegates go vote in the national convention in July for both parties to choose which candidate is going to represent each party. And then during the general election in November, the public votes and is voting for candidates, but through the Electoral College, which is 538 members that will eventually cast your representative vote in December of that year. And then Congress officially counts those votes in early January and inaugurates the President of the United States in mid-January. I hope that helps a little bit. I hope that clarifies at least a couple things for you guys. Anything that I botched up, feel free to reach out to me, let me know, and or look into it yourself and fucking then let me know so we could both learn something out of it. Don't just talk shit. And yeah, like I said, there are several videos in the episode notes, YouTube videos that I found interesting, and a couple websites as well that explain this in a more visual way. If you're more of a visual person, definitely check those out. And I'm sure we'll speak much more about politics in the months to come as the battleground thins and as there are more debates and primaries and caucuses and so on and so forth. And that's the episode, folks. Episode number 40 of the Spun Today podcast. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can do so in several ways. One thing that you guys can do just to partake in it is check out my questionnaire. It's a 5-question questionnaire that I have at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. And it's pretty much geared towards creative types or anybody that's into anything like writing or painting or drawing or anything arty, anything artistic, anything that you're into, any hobby that you have. Check out the questionnaire. It's just 5 questions, pretty much about passion and inspiration and what gets you going, that I take the responses of and read them on the podcast. And the idea behind that is that I'll learn something, other people might as well. And if you can reach out and touch somebody and like spark inspiration in them and like set that ripple, why not? That's one way for all of us to like kind of sort of come together through this podcast and do that. Another option that I want to extend is for any writers or creators that want to be on the actual Spun Today podcast with me. Reach out to me, hit me up through the contact portal of my website at spuntoday.com/contact. Reach out to me. We'll set something up. It could be like, phone, Skype interview or something like that. That would be cool. You can also check out and purchase prints of some of my photography. I like taking pictures of shit sometimes. Some of it comes out decent, and I put it up on the website for free at spuntoday.com/photography. And you guys can, download the pictures from there for free if you want digital copies. But if you want actual physical copies, like a canvas or a poster or something like that, you can order prints through created.com/spuntoday. That's created, CRATED.com/spuntoday, and all that good stuff. Also, shop on Amazon, iTunes, and do so by going through my affiliate link banners, located also on my website, spuntoday.com/affiliate links. And pretty much the way it works is you go to my website, click on the Amazon banner. It'll take you straight to Amazon's website. Nothing you purchase will cost you anything extra than if you just went to Amazon directly. But Amazon does kick back a few pennies on the dollar for all of your purchases just for driving traffic to their website. So it's a cool way to support the podcast, and it does not cost you anything. Another thing that I'm definitely doing a big push for that I want you guys to do is check out my book. I published a book. You can check it out at spuntoday.com/books, or just straight on Amazon. And it's called Make Way for You, Tips for Getting Out of Your Own Way. There's an ebook available as well as a paperback edition. And I would really appreciate if you guys can rate and review it on Amazon. That would be really cool and help get the word out. Just the same way as you guys would rate and review the podcast on iTunes and or Stitcher, which I would also appreciate. And one more point on the book, it's actually still free for Kindle Unlimited members. And those of you that have that, I believe you have the option for a couple more weeks and until the Kindle Unlimited option runs out, which is going to be in March of 2016. So check that out when you guys can. You can still download the ebook free. Like I said, rate and review the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Check me out on Twitter and on Instagram. I got my Instagram back. I remember I told you guys last time, I believe, that it got hacked, and I figured it out. So you guys can hit me up there again at Spun Today on both Twitter and on Instagram. Check out the Facebook fan page at facebook.com/Spun Today. Subscribe to my newsletter. I want to do something new with the newsletter once I get the subscription up. It's going to be, the theme of it is pretty much modeled after 5 Bullet Fridays by Tim Ferriss, which puts out a weekly newsletter on Fridays just of different cool shit, like different music that he's listening to or something new that he bought that he likes, or a book or a quote and like shit like that. I'm going to do something similar, but most likely on Mondays. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm thinking of calling it Mondays Don't Have to Suck, and just sharing a couple cool things, either, a cool video or something funny that I saw, or something inspirational that I read, or whatever, something like that. So sign up to my newsletter at spuntoday.com/newsletter. All you need is your email address, throw it on there, and be in touch. If you like it, keep getting them once a week. I'm not going to bombard you with crazy shit, but check it out. You might like it. And what else? The YouTube page. Check out my YouTube channel. You can get there easiest by going on YouTube, obviously, and just typing out Spun Today, or go through my website. At the footnote of the website, you can click on the YouTube icon, and it'll take you to my YouTube page, where all of these podcast episodes are located, some of which are embedded with like pictures and different photography and shit like that. And you guys can check that out. And lastly, but not leastly, as always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening.